Hello, everyone. It's 4 o'clock. We're going to start in exactly 1 minute. So thanks for joining us. I see that there are 80 of you already on board. We'll be right back with you. Okay, I'm back. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining New Readers Press today for this professional development webinar. My name is Dan Helms. We know at New Readers Press, we know that adult education students are still having anxiety about this new normal of learning. And we want your instructors to have the confidence to create online and blended learning communities where students can thrive. And that's why I've recruited Susan Roberts, an adult education consultant from the state of Kentucky. She's going to share with you today some learning tips, some specific print and digital tools. And these are things you'll be able to use to build student enthusiasm and drive enrollment. So without further delay, Susan, it's all yours.
All right, thanks very much, Dan, for having me today. I see a lot of familiar names here in the participants and a lot of faces that I would have liked to have seen from around the country this past year. But regardless, it's great to see you. And if we haven't met before, welcome. I'm very glad to be here with you today as we look forward to discussing blended learning for the next little bit. And we're going to be discussing this in 3 settings, more or less. One-on-one, small group, and in-person classes. And whether that's physically so or through synchronous online instruction, same thing in this context. So we'll talk about some tips for working more specifically in each of these 3 environments. But first, what is blended learning? Blended, hybrid, distance. Are they all the same? It seems like, especially in the media these days, where online learning is occupying a lot of attention, they're used interchangeably. So let's unpack this just a little bit. So distance education refers to entirely online learning. So you might have a student who enrolls in your center and completes all coursework via an online curriculum that is set up for distance learning, if that makes sense. Hybrid learning typically provides ad hoc material for students to access if they choose. So hybrid can also sometimes involve teaching physically present students at one point and online students simultaneously, but true blended learning plans ahead to ensure that all online and in-person learning fits together cohesively with the goal to have the 2 components reinforce each other. So true blended learning plans ahead, once again, that all online and in-person instruction fits together cohesively. So side note, I'm referencing the New Readers Press Blended Learning Guide in the next few slides. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it. It cuts through a lot of the clutter and provides good information to take off with blended learning. And yes, I will share the link for that a little bit later in the presentation. Now, a big question. It's great that we have blended learning, but is it effective? That's a very important question, of course. So the good news is that research shows that the answer to that question is yes. It is actually more effective for adult students than either face-to-face or online learning alone. And reasons for this include blended learning extends learning time on task so students progress more quickly. Students are still being led through instruction outside of face-to-face time and that online component rather than say, completing packets of coursework without something or someone kind of guiding them through that process. Blended learning also enables learners to review what was covered in class for reinforcement or as a makeup. They are truly able to practice what they've learned in a guided yet more independent environment. And finally, blended learning is often more appealing and engaging. The combination of the two tends to keep students interested and engaged more than one or the other. But despite this new learning environment, our goals for students haven't changed. First and foremost, we want students to be successful in our classrooms, of course. We want them to attain their high school equivalency or brush up on those skills for college and prepare for the workforce. But we also want them to be successful in finding a job with a family-sustaining wage. We want to see them get a leg up for themselves and their families. We want them to not only get a job, but of course to keep it as well. And we want our students to be contributing employees in their places of work. And of course, we want this to ultimately all contribute to leading meaningful lives. So we want them to achieve their goals and hopes and dreams. And of course, all starts in our classrooms. But all of that said, we of course know that there are barriers. There were barriers before a pandemic, and those barriers have more or less been amplified largely. There is a hesitancy with many when it comes to learning in a digital way. We see here, half of Americans aren't comfortable using technology to learn, and yet here we are. Some of these barriers, and we know that there are many, include lack of technology. Now, the good news is lots of issues with that are being overcome, even from the local government. Local communities are helping with that aspect. Lack of internet access. So not that devices aren't devices available, it's that there's no internet connectivity itself in certain areas. And here in Kentucky, certain places of our state, just like every state, have that problem. Divided attention and obligations. Obviously, everyone has much going on at present. And many adults are prioritizing helping their children with online learning, which is understandable. Limited digital literacy, as we just saw in the previous slide, is a big issue. Folks who aren't comfortable or think that they wouldn't be comfortable with learning in an online environment. And of course, life circumstances and experiences have always been a struggle with our population. Yet many of these barriers can be overcome with the blended approach, which creates a supportive environment that provides digital learning that supports in class rather than taking the place of. And this often leads to students who are more digitally resilient and persistent as they come to appreciate actually the combination of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. So they like the new opportunity to extend their in-person learning. Now, one element that can help address a few of these barriers ahead of beginning blended learning is to host an online orientation, which provides a chance to view the tools they're expected to use in action. And so keeping this kind of bare bones and as simple as possible can help put students more at ease as they begin their blended learning journey. So here at this point, and I saw that Dan warned you this was coming, there are 2 questions here for you in our presentation today that you can answer in the chat. So here is question number 1. On a scale of 1 to 5, how prevalent is blended learning in your program? So this is also a quick question you could use with your students, 5 to 5, if you will, in a digital setting. On a 1 to 5, how close are you? With 1 being not at all, 5 to, hey, we're there, we're crushing it. I'll give you just a few seconds here to reply.
Susan, I'm seeing mostly 5s and 1s, not a lot in between.
That was my same observation as well. Yeah, well, welcome to all of you. I am seeing some in-betweens, kind of a 4.8, I like that. That's super specific. What is Zoom? David Lewis, welcome. I love that. All right, good to know. So not surprisingly, kind of all across the board. So that either way, you're not alone, clearly. If you're a 1, you're not alone. If you're a 5, you're not alone, or somewhere in between. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yes. Thank you, Greg, for that, 328. All right. So as promised, we're really focusing on blended learning from the framework of lessons today. Teacher-centered, student-centered lessons that you can take and run with, and also what are those elements of lessons that make up blended learning? Well, it shouldn't be surprising that there are things that haven't changed with blended learning, of course. Real life content that's engaging, we still want to ensure that the tools and resources we're using are in fact adult friendly, especially in the current climate. There are hundreds of online curricula choices, but many of them are directed at children. In fact, some of the ones that I have seen come across my screen, if you will, in some of the work that I do with adult educators, some of the things I will see referenced are things that I use with my own children who I'm homeschooling this year, and they're 8 and 6. So probably not the best choice for adults. So we still want to keep in mind that they are adults and that there is still plenty of real life content out there that we need to pull from. We of course want curriculum that leads toward gains. We want tools and resources that build toward student success. Obviously, this is the case. So how do we do that in a blended way? Student collaboration is still extremely important. Building an online community where students feel part of the goings-on is more important than ever, probably. And having students work together, whether in person or online, can really help with retention if there's a sense of belonging for them. And finally, that same I do, we do, you do methodology. That's going to be the case still for blended learning, and we'll discuss that later with examples. That gradual release of students to practice new skills on their own, that hasn't changed. But of course, though, there are differences. Now, in some cases, learning is more student-directed, so it does somewhat require students to drive their own learning a bit more. However, the beauty of the blended classroom is that students still receive ample support for their learning. You're still providing that face-to-face, if you will, supplemented with online support. We want to see smaller chunks of content. Most of us, present company included, can only handle so much Zooming. So smaller chunks of content not only help with the Zoom fatigue, but also allow students to see progress more quickly, which can lead to better persistence and engagement. Next, we need to make an effort at engaging even more with student check-ins. Many of us can make full-time work of contacting students. I know this is true, but having consistent student check-ins via virtual office hours or weekly virtual appointments or even message board discussions keeps students engaged in that learning community. And finally, a more intentional focus on planning. Organization is very much key when it comes to blended learning. So choosing a few resources, sticking to them, can really help to cut through the clutter and provide focused planning that is both teacher and student friendly. Now, blended learning can take 2 distinct forms. So the first is in-classroom blended, where students are simultaneously working in an online environment and learning via teacher-led instruction. Now, of course, some centers are open for business, not all. So this could take a different approach, of course, for the current environment. Or the alternate model has students working and learning together face-to-face, then in a learning lab environment. So they also work on material at home that supports learning in the virtual world of today. So blended learning can take on either of those forms depending on the needs of your students and your learning center as well. So with this in mind, New Readers Press has created blended learning lessons that use print and digital resources for in-person instruction and extension of concepts via online learning. So let's look at the lesson template and lessons as another means to see the elements of blended learning, lessons in action, so to speak. So here is a blank, ready to use, blended learning lesson. I can see potential everywhere with this. And notice that not much is different, really, from a traditional lesson plan, but we are going to start by pointing out those differences. So we have the presence of both print and digital materials in the pre-planning and teaching sections. Because, as we just said, in a true blending fashion, knowing ahead of time what materials you're using and in what order helps to ensure that instruction is consistent. We want students to know what to expect each time they enter your classroom, whether physically, of course, or virtually. And this is where pre-planning really comes into play. So each lesson should include physical print materials of some kind, which are largely used during the synchronous portion of the lesson. And then the extension or out of class portion relies on supporting digital content that extends the student experience. So once again, it's a very connected way of planning. You're thinking about what you're using in class and how out of class digital support can amplify what they learned when they were physically or virtually with you face to face. So speaking of consistency in the flow of the lesson, instruction itself won't be that much different than in a regular classroom, at least as far as raw elements are concerned. So as I've always said, I know instructor time is very limited and few of us have time to devote to writing our own lessons regularly. That probably goes without saying for most of us. But the good news is New Readers Press has a dozen blended lessons ready to grab and use. So we're going to look at some examples of those in the three formats we mentioned, that one-on-one blended, the small group blended, and the in-person with digital platform support. So New Readers has developed 3 lessons each for their pre-HSE book series, and then also for GED, TASK, and HiSET Score Boost series, and includes the online learning courses for each as the digital content. So we're going to begin with the in-person digital platform. So we'll use this as our example. In virtual environments, instructor modeling and guided practice becomes even more important. These lessons include engagement activities that can easily translate to the virtual classroom. For instance, the opening activity in this fact versus opinion lesson mentions a stack of note cards. Now, this can easily be done instead with a slide deck, much like I've done here, to magnify the section of this lesson. There are many, many tools that you can use with flashcards. Padlet, Quizlet, there are lots of things that you can use for an online method instead of face-to-face. For larger groups of students, the in-person with digital platform lessons provide tips for grouping students virtually or in person for guided practice. So of course, instructor modeling, guided practice are still the first things we start with after the introduction of the lesson. So we see here the note cards with fact versus opinion. Again, easily translated into a digital environment. Now, as far as small group blended, when working in small groups, focus on pairing students whenever possible. Notice that in this sample math lesson on mean, median, and mode, students are paired to complete sample problems together and then share their answers on a collaborative document or slide if they're not physically in the same space. So even in small groups, building community continues to be an important element of engagement. So as we group students, either in person or pair them, or virtually via breakout rooms or whatever your software allows, we still want to have a lot of communication between those pairs and then the classroom at large. And that's where, again, that collaborative document that can easily be shared via a chat and be ready to then you as the teacher to digest and review once students come back into the main room really adds a lot of value to those small group blended lessons. Now for the one-on-one blended. How many of us often find ourselves teaching one-on-one? And virtual lessons can provide a good replication of this idea as well. So one-on-one lessons, as we see, of course, still follow the same methodology more or less, but you kind of become the student's partner in learning for many of the activities. So this tutoring style lesson includes a Venn diagram, again, easily replicated via a presentation slide or a digital whiteboard like Google Jamboard. So we still have, even in the one-on-one blended, what we've provided for you is still the print materials, digital materials, objectives, and all the steps there. Now, one thing that's important to note too is each of these lessons, of course, can be adapted for any of the situations. If you find yourself teaching one student, the in-person with the digital platform can, of course, be adapted for that one-on-one interaction and kind of vice versa. So you really have just a whole vault of things to choose from. Now, as I mentioned before, the mix of print and digital content is very strategic. That's what's unique about blended learning. So the included online New Readers Press content highlights the corresponding online unit and lessons that give additional out-of-class practice for the student. So typically, these lessons include print content for in-person lessons, and then again, that digital support outside of class that corresponds to what they've already learned with you. They're getting the chance not only to practice the content that they've learned, but also to really enhance their digital skills, that digital literacy. So this is a really neat way for students to not only practice what they've learned, but practice their skills as well. So now let's briefly discuss some tips for those of you who are teaching synchronously at present, some tips for virtual instruction when it comes to blended classrooms. Again, it's really important to keep it short, simple, and consistent. So the more consistency any of us can have in our lives these days, I think, is critical to our mental health. So knowing what to expect each class, especially in something that students are already slightly hesitant about, really is important to put them more at ease so that they can come and learn and that they'll come back. It's helpful too to provide visual instructions. You know, it's really easy for me to sit here, for instance, and say, so if you can click on, go ahead and minimize your window, open a new window, click on this link and go here and fill this out. If I show you how to do that ahead of time, that really helps with blended learning environments as well. So walk students through what you'd like them to do and how to do it. It's really helpful to utilize tools for that synchronous interaction as well. Again, the digital whiteboard, like Google Jamboard, for instance. Breakout rooms are your best friend a lot of the time. And the fun thing is about breakout rooms is I could either put all of you in individual breakout rooms if I wanted to, or I can let Zoom do the heavy lifting and they can assign rooms for me. So it's kind of whatever you prefer. And I think that there are strengths in each of those depending on the variety of students that you have in any given class. Online polls are another way to interact regularly with students and make sure that they're still with you. Another tip is to create what I like to call a failure-friendly environment. You know, our students, as we know, are hesitant sometimes to even walk in our door physically. And so especially in an environment where they feel very insecure, it's important that we reassure them that both mistakes with technology and in learning are normal and welcome and to be expected. And, you know, in fact, I know I make plenty of errors myself that I could always point out as learning experiences for others. So as those come up for you, it would be really helpful for you to point those out to students and to lastly laugh when that does happen. So foster a sense of humor. Things are stressful enough right now without taking ourselves too seriously. So keeping it light can be very helpful. Now, one issue we can sometimes run into is tracking student work time. So let's talk about that for just a minute. It's often been a challenge outside of the classroom, but as virtual classrooms become more prevalent, of course, so do the ways to track their work. So one thing that can really be helpful is just a collaborative digital form of any kind, such as a Google survey or a Google Sheet for sign-in. You can post the link in the chat each class. Students can click it, and then that spreadsheet can open right up and they can check box their name under the date. So that can be a quick way to give them time or credit for their time with you in person, quote unquote. You can also, of course, nowadays, most platforms, you can pull and track, student work time. So time on task is easily pulled for out of class instances from the digital platforms themselves. And finally, this is kind of an insider tip if you're using collaborative documents as part of your lessons, like HyperDoc lessons, for instance, you can track the change history. So it'll tell you who was in there, what they did each time they typed something, and that, you know, it's kind of a workaround way to try to figure out how long students spent on a lesson. Because also, just like the K-12 teachers are kind of struggling with, they want to be sure students aren't just fast forwarding videos or that sort of thing. So change history on collaborative documents can give you a lot of tips as to how long it takes students when they're engaged with your content. All right, so 20 minutes into my spiel, I'm springing another question on you. So the tracking of student time is a hot topic. So if you would please share in the chat what your go-to method or methods are for tracking student work time for blended learning, let us know what you're up to. Terry mentioned learning management system. The platforms, yes. See a lot of learning management systems as well as the digital platforms in use. Good. Google Sheets, another shout out to them. Good. You're right, Canvas and many of these learning management systems do track it. Google Classroom is, of course, a popular landing place or landing site for students in a blended classroom. Blackboard as well. Greg, big brother. Love that. Thanks, Amy. Hey, Amy, good to see you. Amy's one of my Kentucky pals, I think. Very good. So lots and lots of things that we already are using, and I'm mainly seeing digital platform jumping out. So that makes sense. Once again, that's always been present more or less, but definitely very necessary now more than ever, since we don't necessarily have students, we don't see them face to face to remind them, hey, by the way, let's make sure that you get all your work turned in. So that's good to know. Good to know. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about today is we're going to actually meet those resources that are being used in the blended lessons from new readers that we have seen today. So we're going to start with those pre-high school equivalency workbooks. They build basic skills with an easy to use format. So each book starts with a skills pretest to let students know where they are before they start. And then there are 2-page lesson formats with basic skills reviews and practice test questions. Now, just like with the score boost that we're going to talk about in a minute, the nice thing about these workbooks with that 2-page lesson format is, again, the shorter and the more simple that we can keep lessons for students, the more engaged that we can keep them. So that's very important as we continue down this path that we find ourselves on. So cumulative reviews then are at the end that model all 3 high school equivalency test item types, and complete answers and explanations for all pre-test, practical, and post-test questions are present as well. All right, so then we have Score Boost for GED, High Set, and Task. So the very popular Score Boost series uses a 3-step process, no matter what HSE test is being talked about. So they review a strategy first, then they practice by example. It's very much a guided practice for students. And then students answer practice questions on their own to try the given strategy for the question type that the lesson is about, which is really handy. So then there are lots of sample test questions that model the thinking process. So again, it walks students through that gradual release of content and skills. Then we have hundreds of test questions that provide essential practice. And then TestWise offers high school equivalency test taking tips as well. So that's one of the elements in each of the books. And then answers, explanations, self-evaluation, and study charts all help to give students the feedback that they need to pass. So I'm a huge fan of the Score Boost books. So let's look at some sample pages from each. So here we can see the strategy first introduced. They're learning the skills that they need to look through a question and answer it when it comes to developing a supported conclusion. So this is to both analyze conclusions given in reading passages and then answering the extended response in this situation. So we can see here, it gives students a nice introduction to the strategy that they're going to apply as they go through the lesson. Then they're given lots of examples and then the think alouds that say things like, I can use a calculator to represent measurements as fractions. So it walks students through the thinking process as they're learning the different question types and the strategies that they would need to use to answer those correctly. You know, a big struggle is test anxiety with students where they know the content, they know the skills that they need to answer each question, but they don't have confidence that they're going to be able to do it with new scenarios. So that's what's nice about Score Boost is it really walks them through via the think alouds, the TestWise questions, and the strategy reviews. And then finally, at the end of the lesson, they get a chance to really apply that strategy. For instance, here, it gives them a new passage, it gives them new questions, but also tells them what to think about in the first portion. So it kind of activates that knowledge that they have and kind of helps to reduce the anxiety that they may feel about encountering this new information. Now, the New Readers Press online learning is the digital platform used to support learning in each of the lessons here on New Readers Press. And this computer and mobile-friendly tool has courses for each of the HSE tests and the pre-HSE core skills course as well. So this is the platform that's used in all of those lessons that we were just looking at and complements those printed resources. So here's a little look into the dashboard of the New Readers Press online learning. This particular one shows GED math. So we see lots of student-friendly navigation. This isn't super overwhelming for students, especially with a nice online orientation. if you're walking them through the tools that they're going to be using in your blended classroom. And a couple of things that you might notice here are they can always see where they are in the course. They can have flashcards, quiz them at any time, as well as practice questions and games. Games are, of course, fun for everyone, no matter the age, and these are all adult-friendly games, which is nice. Another feature is discussion groups. So students can create a group themselves and invite other classmates if they'd like, or they can be invited into a group by someone else. And instructors, of course, can be parts of this as well. So it's a nice way, once again, to kind of have that asynchronous communication back and forth and to build the community that we know is so important for students in this current environment. So here's a sample practice question here for operations with whole numbers and decimals. You can see too that there's a tracking bar there at the top. It tells them that they're at question 1 of 10. And it does also give them a difficulty level. Now, one thing that you can see kind of down here at the bottom of the dashboard, each concept that a student is working with, they indicate how they feel about it. If they have high confidence or I think I need to review that again, they can click as a reminder for themselves low confidence in subtraction, for instance, and that will remind them to go back in and review that more. And finally, what is really neat to me is the course progress as students do work through. They can see how far they have come, how much they have left to do, and they can even set a goal for a test date if they would like. There are little encouragements along the way as far as badges, if you will, they can earn the more that they interact with the system, which is really important as well, of course, for students to continue to feel really good about what they're doing and the progress that they're making, especially during a time when we all need a boost, right? So that's one of my favorite features of the online learning platform as well. Now, as far as where all of this good stuff can be found, the lessons that we learned about today, as well as that blending learning guide, which I highly recommend, can be found here at the URL at the top. And we have their blended learning guide at newreaderspress.com/blended learning guide. So you can click the sample lessons, the 12 lessons that are available for use there, that are already grab and go using the resources we just learned about, as well as a customizable blended learning lesson plan template that can use any resources and platforms that you already have. And it's kind of a plug and play. So that's all, of course, always our goal, student-centered, teacher-centered products and support. So that basically ends my portion of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan to tell you a little bit more about some of the promotions going on with new readers and who you might wish to speak with to learn more about all of these great products.
Thank you, Susan. I was just typing a response to Carrie. Carrie asked about the score boost for CASAS workbooks. So rather than finish typing it, I'll just say that, it's going to be phased in. It's brand new. The first title will be available January 4th. And, we've got workbooks that will be coming in all through January, February, March. And I think there are a couple in April as well. So in the first quarter of 2021. But in terms of all of the other material, a great thing to do if we didn't get your question answered today is to ask your New Readers Press representative. And if you're not sure who that is, let me just, actually it's on your screen there, but so that you can find a sales rep, so that you can just click on it. I'm going to put it in the chat for you. So let me do that now. All right, so that's in the chat, newreaderspress.com/find a sales rep. And then there is contact us to call customer service with product specific questions. So that's available to you there. And then there's the customer service email address, nrp@proliteracy.org. And of course, the 800 number is still the most common way people reach us, 800-448-8878. And I believe there's another slide or two. And I wanted to let you know, everybody on the call, especially, Susan did a nice job of talking about blended learning, some of the challenges, some of the solutions. And she showed you how some of our print material, like our workbooks, some of our online content can be plugged into that template that she created for blended learning lesson plans. And so anything that is purchased from New Readers Press during the month of December, the shipping is free on all orders $300 or more. And there's a code you have to use for that, and that's on the next slide. And that code there at the bottom is DEC20. So if you were to contact customer service and give them that code, place an order, shipping is free. And these days, that's a pretty big break. Shipping is not cheap. I know, because I've been ordering almost everything for Christmas online and not doing any shopping in stores this year. But thank you, Susan Roberts. And Susan will have seen a comment in there that will have her scratching her head. It was about potatoes, but that was directed at Greg, and he's also here at New Readers Press with me. And so that's what that comment was. That's who that comment was for. And there are some of the things that are available to you. But again, Susan, thank you for your help. I hope this was helpful to everyone out there. Quite a few of you joined us, over 100, and we really appreciate it. So have a great holiday, and thanks for joining New Readers Press.
Thanks so much, everyone.